We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 11th of September 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
It's a long past time to confront the fact that violence and murder are the tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree.
US conservative activist Charlie Kirk, an influential ally of President Donald Trump, was fatally shot on Wednesday while speaking at a Utah university. We'll have the details. Israel's strike on Doha has sparked outrage and raised doubts about fragile ceasefire diplomacy. We'll have the latest from the region. We'll go live to Paris to hear about the swearing in of the new Prime Minister and the protests on the streets of France. We'll have a rustle through the front pages and a roundup of automotive news from our Tokyo studio. Plus,
we want to use Thai design and Thai designer as a platform to foresee the changing in the design world.
We'll find out why Thailand wants to be Asia's design capital. And finally, as the National Gallery in London announces major developments, we'll ask what exactly constitutes modern art. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. A Brazilian Supreme Court justice has voted to acquit former President Jair Bolsonaro of an alleged coup attempt, raising the odds of an appeal of a verdict this week. US President Donald Trump halted the deportation of hundreds of South Korean Hyundai battery plant workers arrested during an immigration enforcement raid and proposed they stay to train Americans. And Nepal's health ministry says 25 people have now been killed and more than 600 injured in anti-corruption protests that forced Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli to resign. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, Charlie Kirk, the 31-year-old founder of Turning Point USA and a close ally of Donald Trump, has been shot dead while speaking at Utah Valley University. His killing is a stark reminder of the rise in political violence in the United States and raises questions about security at public events. Well, joining me now is Scott Lucas, adjunct professor at the Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Scott, thanks for coming on the show once again at very short notice. What do we know about how this attack unfolded?
So Charlie Kirk, the right-wing activist, was speaking at Utah Valley University. One of the first of 13 stops he was going to make trying to mobilize the support of young people for Donald Trump, for MAGA, and for right, even hard right politics. And Kirk's been doing this for years. He's the founder of Turning Point USA when he was a teenager, which has become an important element in the Trumpist movement. As he was speaking to them, and just after he had been speaking about, indeed, gun violence, he was in a courtyard, and the shooter was on the roof of a building overlooking that courtyard. Kirk was struck once in the neck, and the reports came out very quickly that he had been critically wounded. He was whisked away from the scene, and he died shortly thereafter.
Has the shooter been identified or detained?
No, there was a person who was questioned by police, and initially the university came out and said that this person was a suspect in the case, but that person was later released, indicating that he or she is not under suspicion. So no, this person is still at large.
So you gave us a little bit of Kirk's history there. I wonder how significant his role was in shaping the US conservative movement and indeed returning Trump to power.
Oh, it's been vital. If you go back to 2016 when Donald Trump first ran for president and Charlie Kirk had founded Turning Point USA, he was part of a group of relatively young people who were on the right, I would say the hard right. And they not only were significant in putting their points of view, they were significant in really whipping up a particular projection of American politics. This whole, as it were, confrontation with those who they didn't like, who they would characterize as being on the left, who they would characterize as being woke, using this derogatory word. They were very forthright, for example, in standing against any limitation on guns. They were very forthright standing for gun control, for example. They're very anti-immigrant. And at times, to be honest with you, not necessarily Kirk's, but others who were linked with him, would even whip up, as it were, conspiracy theories. Donald Trump tapped into that. He tapped into the rhetoric that Charlie Kirk was putting out there, and it was especially important if you take it all the way up to 2024, because Kirk targeted young men as being a key force that could help get Donald Trump reelected. It's very, very forthright, some would even say macho presentation of American politics, this emphasis on getting back to an American family with women in the home and men being the tough guys, the breadwinners. And again, it worked. I mean, you look at young men, they were one of the key reasons why Trump did get back into the White House.
Finally, Scott, what does this say about the safety of political speakers in public?
Well, I think it's important to say we're not just talking about political speakers, Georgina. And the reason why I say that is that yesterday, just as Charlie Kirk was being shot, fatally wounded, there were 3 students who were critically injured in a shooting in Colorado at a high school near Columbine, which is where, of course, almost 20 were killed in 1999. So it's the safety of all Americans. But in the case of political figures, it's only a few weeks ago that you had 2 lawmakers in Minnesota that were shot in their homes, one who was killed, one who was critically wounded. So it's not just in public spaces. The fact here is that in a polarized America, when you have voices, in fact, across the political spectrum that are not calling for dialogue but for confrontation, and when they portray their political opponents as the enemy, I'm afraid this feeds into what has been a series of political attacks that are likely not to stop.
Scott Lucas, thank you very much indeed. You're listening to The Globalist. Israel has followed its unprecedented strikes on Doha with air raids on Houthi positions in Yemen. The twin operations hitting Hamas targets in Qatar and Houthi camps and media offices in Sana'a have sparked international condemnation. Well, I'm joined now from Istanbul by Ruth Michelson, who's a journalist and Middle East correspondent. Ruth, thanks for coming on the programme. How are Washington and Brussels adjusting their stance after this escalation?
Well, I mean, we've certainly seen after the strikes on Doha earlier this week that there was mounting criticism of Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, and the choice of these choice of targets. At the same time, particularly in Washington, there seems to be another repeat of what we've seen time and time again, that the Israelis conduct an airstrike, choose a target, and there are major questions about how much information they gave to the Americans before launching this attack on a U.S. ally, a place that hosts the largest airbase, American airbase in the Middle East, and that is something that we're seeing playing out now. That there are real questions about the order of events and who knew what when, whether the Americans were given an opportunity to tell Israel that there would be bad outcomes if, or it was something that they simply didn't want to happen if Israel were to strike a major ally.
Now you're in Istanbul. What has Turkey said about this?
Well, this is the attack on Doha is something that has obviously frightened Ankara in many ways, because it has continued this idea that, as we're seeing from some of the statements from Netanyahu yesterday, that if that the Israelis feel that there is justification to pursue members of Hamas in any location across the Middle East, and so we've seen plenty of inflammatory and quite extreme statements from Turkish officials, including from the foreign ministry, saying that the targeting of the Hamas negotiation delegation, while ceasefire talks will continue, show that Israel does not aim to reach peace, but rather to continue the war, and saying that this is proof that Israel has adopted an expansionist politics in the region, and what they labeled terrorism as state policy. Now, this is something that we're starting to see a similar level of statements coming out of the Qatari leadership, no longer talking in sort of diplomatic terms, although they have said that they want to see a large regional gathering in Doha in the coming days to talk about a response to the Israeli attack, but instead using a kind of extremely critical language of Israel's decisions that we haven't seen them use until now, talking, for example, the Qatari Prime Minister talking about the entire Gulf region being at risk as a result of Israel's actions.
And what about the EU? What's Brussels saying about this?
Well, we've seen a ramping up of criticism of Israeli policy, the idea that Israel will weigh consequences for Israel, primarily focused at accusations that Israel has starved people in Gaza, and that there needs to be a realignment of the relationship between the EU and Israel as a result. So that also means a potential reconsideration of weapon sales and other forms of political support. But I mean, we've seen time and time again that Britain, the EU, and many of Israel's Western allies have often responded to Israeli attacks by saying that, that this is a potential escalation, that there could be consequences in the future, and warning of potential further escalation, but very little indication in general in the long term that Israeli allies are willing to do things like cut off weapons sales to Israel.
So now that Hamas knows it won't be safe if it agrees to negotiate openly and in person, where does this leave any future prospect of peace talks, and will anybody be willing to host them?
Well, the Qataris have said that the talks are suspended while they assess their own internal security. I think there are also questions about who the negotiators might be. Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran last year. He was previously the head of their negotiations team. He was certainly seen as the group's diplomat. This attack has now targeted people who are considered far more hardline than Haniyeh was. The indication that we've had in the past is that the group would be willing to move somewhere like Turkey, although there has been substantial resistance to that from Turkey's Western partners. But the risk is that because of an attack like this, that the remaining members of the Hamas political bureau would go somewhere like Iran, where then negotiations, ceasefire talks in the same model as the Qataris agreed to do when they agreed to host Hamas, where they are the interlocutor for Western partners that can't speak directly to Hamas, that kind of format would be impossible in Tehran, because obviously that is a place that does not have the same kind of diplomatic contact and has not used the same kind of diplomatic leverage as the Qataris have to be in this position of negotiator, which is why this attack was so jarring and would appear to really be about to cause a major shift in these potential talks.
Now, we know that Israel also hit Houthi sites in Yemen, continuing this whole tit-for-tat action with the group. I wonder how, if Israel can realistically engage on multiple fronts at once without stretching capacity, fighting the Houthis, also doing this, taking on various all-comers, and how much there is a risk of contagion.
Well, the way that Benjamin Netanyahu has been speaking about this war since very, very early on is that he has told the Israeli public that he is fighting a war on what he describes as 7 fronts. And so there is this idea of, there's this idea of that he wants to, he is showing the Israeli public that, in his words, that he is defending them by spurring these attacks, by Israel attacking across the region. But there are, of course, major questions about Israel's capacity to do that, as well as to continue fighting its longest ever war in Gaza.
Ruth, thank you very much indeed. That's Ruth Michelson there. And this is The Globalist. It's 8:15 in Warsaw, 7:15 here in London. Now, Poland shuts its border with Belarus at midnight tonight. This comes after Russian drones were shot down over its territory for the first time. Prime Minister Donald Tusk says the country is closer to open conflict than at any time since the Second World War, as Russia and Belarus prepare to launch their Zapad war games. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by Julia Jen, who's Monocle's researcher and writer. Julia, many thanks for coming in. As our listeners probably know, you are from Ukraine. How significant was the downing of those Russian drones over Poland?
I mean, it was pretty shocking, wasn't it, waking up to that news? I was actually tracking the drones that were flying over Ukraine. You know, Ukraine suffered a huge attack that night, 500 plus drones in Ukraine's own airspace, as well as cruise missiles. And I was tracking them before I was going to bed to check, are my family going to be okay tonight? It looked like the airspace above them specifically was safe. But then I noticed at the bottom of the list of where the drones were heading, suddenly it said Poland. And then it was kind of one drone is heading to this Polish city, to Lublin, and one drone heading to Rzeszów, another Polish city, etc., etc. And I was really shocked. I thought maybe I'm reading this wrong. But this is a huge escalation, really. And I don't know if we really have grasped the significance of this in more Western capitals, but I think it's really being felt in Poland and in other frontline Eastern NATO states. This is the first time that NATO has engaged with Russian drones. This is a huge moment in this war. And it's important to point out that there have been 30 drones that have entered Polish airspace since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But none of them have ever been shot down. They may have exploded or they may have turned back into Ukraine to continue an attack there. But this is the first time that there has been engagement. It's been a test of NATO's capabilities, really.
And did NATO pass that test? Because it would appear that it exposed some gaps, really, in their air defence.
Yes, absolutely. So, about a year ago, there was a Russian drone that entered Latvian airspace. And at the time, the NATO jets stayed on the ground. And there was criticism of this. Why did they not go to counter the threat? Now, we did have jets taking off here and shooting down 4 of these drones, but 20 entered. So we have another 16 that crashed on their own. And they were said to crash near high-value targets, so military bases. This is an issue. Why are NATO using military jets, F-16s, to shoot down these very cheaply made, very basic drones? They're sort of like kind of the brute force. They're kind of like a stone being hurled through the sky. What Ukrainians are using, and this is a really interesting moment in where, are NATO going to send instructors to go and learn how Ukrainians are shooting down these drones? Are they going to be actually trained by the Ukrainians? Here, what Ukrainians use are mobile defense teams. So literally a pickup truck, you've got a machine gun on it, and that's how you shoot down these drones, because the really difficult targets, so the cruise missiles, etc. They come later. These drones sort of clear the way. They distract. And NATO couldn't actually deal with just 20 drones that entered Polish airspace. Ukraine at that time was struggling with 500 plus. So this is an issue for sure.
And do you think that this was Russia testing NATO?
Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll talk about the Zapad drills later, but this is absolutely a moment in which, several things are happening here. Russia is picking up intelligence on Poland, on their air defense systems, because when these drones enter into Poland, they actually have a lot of different sensors on them. They have a SIM card. They are picking up loads of intelligence that they wouldn't be able to just get otherwise. So they're picking up lots of information on how Polish air defense systems work, who responds, who doesn't respond, that sort of thing, and what kind of units are engaged, how are units responding to them as well, specifically units that are stationed along that Belarus border. So this is absolutely a test of NATO's capabilities.
Now, we know that the Polish border with Belarus is going to close tonight, and that is because of the Zapad exercises that you mentioned. What exactly are they? What's being rehearsed in these drills?
Yes, so these happen every 2 years, and we know that the 2023 one was cancelled. That was cancelled because Russia is basically tied up in Ukraine, so they didn't have enough manpower, enough sort of equipment to even rehearse with. But now they're kind of gathering back strength. And what these drills are usually about are just about kind of enhancing that cooperation between Belarus and Russia. Russia really strengthening their hold on Belarus, on their kind of military, and really testing that eastern border, because that's, those are all the Baltic states are along there. And you've got that gap between the Baltic states and Poland, the Suwałki gap. And that's the bit that really Russia is really testing there and seeing what they can pick up and seeing what they can do there.
Could these Zapad exercises be used to mask another Russian attack, as Ukraine warns?
Yes. Well, this is what Ukrainians are talking about, because the last Zapad attack that started, it was in the end attack. It started in 2021 and it culminated in January, February. That was when the full-scale invasion of Ukraine started in late February that year. So I don't know. I hope not. And I hope everyone is hoping not. I think everyone is hoping not. But they absolutely... I think we have to be on our guard. NATO is on their guard, for sure, for small incursions, for perhaps little sort of... decoy attacks, little distractions and so on. And it's really about sowing fear in the Central European population. The use of... I think we'll talk about the Oreshnik, the missile tests that are happening there, and Russia's really expanding their capability of that. But also, in Central Europe, you have politicians like Orban who are really saying, let's sit down with Russia, let's rebuild ties, because we don't want war with them. Look what happened to Ukraine. They didn't want to talk to Russia. And this is what's happened to them. So let's not turn our cities, etc., into bombed out sites. And I think that's what's really driving that fear in Central Europe. Yes.
As you say, there is a nuclear element to all of this. So I wonder, is Donald Tusk right? How dangerous is this moment for Europe?
I think it's incredibly dangerous. I think this is really could be the next step in all these little steps that Russia's taking. I think Russia likes to take these little steps. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine didn't just start then, did it? We had the annexation of Crimea, then we had the incursions in eastern Ukraine, we had supposed separatist movements that were really being fomented by Russia. So it's little step by little step, and I think this could really be the next step.
Julia Jen, thank you. Still to come on the programme. Protests erupt in France. We'll cross to Paris for the details. This is The Globalist.
Each of us has a craft, a calling that inspires us. Whether it's how a coffee is brewed, a chair is built, or how money is looked after. There's a love for the work, a care that compels you forward. For us at UBS, it's about designing a unique outcome for you. Because whatever your craft may be, ours is built around helping you succeed. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Let's continue now with today's newspapers, and joining me in the studio is Anita Riotta, Monocle's foreign desk producer. Anita, we've just been hearing from Julia what a very, very dangerous moment this might be for Europe. And of course, one of the ways Europe is going to counter this is by spending more on defence. Italy is receiving $15 billion for military spending. Tell us more on this.
Yes, absolutely. So the EU Commission has just allocated the funds for different EU member states for their defense spendings. These are loans that countries will then have to repay. And it is interesting to see, and it speaks to the moment that Julia was just telling our listeners more about, but to see also where most of the money went. So the biggest recipient was Poland with 43.7 billion euros. Then Romania, France, even Hungary, which also Julia brought into the discussion with Orban, is an interesting case study there, but they received over 15 billion euros. So the EU is spending vast amount of money to make sure that their member states are bringing their technology up to speed, are making sure their recruits are up to speed. And Italy received the 5th largest contribution from the bunch. So it's a really staggering amount of money for how much these countries used to spend on this type of thing.
And of course, some Italian politicians are very angry about this.
Absolutely. The governing coalition, which is made up of 3 right-wing parties, is splintering over this budget. So Matteo Salvini, the leader of Lega or Northern League, says that only sovereign nations should be in charge of how much money they allocate to what types of spending. And he insisted that states should only be able to borrow to arm themselves and not, he says we're not building an EU army. So if then Italy and France are working on something together, that needs to happen between the 2 member states and not at the EU level. So it is evidencing some fragmentation in that coalition.
I'd like to move on now to a story that I'm finding increasingly interesting. So at first it was just Jeffrey Epstein's birthday book, and there were allegations that Donald Trump had contributed to it. This was published in the Wall Street Journal. He completely denied it. Congress, we've now seen this. It does exist. Whether it was Trump or not is still unproven. Most people think that it was. But now Britain's been drawn into this because Peter Mandelson is the UK ambassador to Washington. And he also has contributed to this book. And he's come out and admitted it and said that there's probably more to come. In the book, he calls Epstein his best pal. This is causing problems for Keir Starmer. But surely if Mandelson resigns, as people are calling for, where does that leave Trump?
It is, you're absolutely correct. It seems like a story with a bottomless hole, and it just keeps going, and there are constantly new twists and turns. Look, it seems that there are so many different conflating elements to this specific moment in time. Listeners will remember that also Keir Starmer's had Angela Rayner, his deputy PM, resign a few days ago over a tax mistake. So I don't know that he's probably gung-ho to have another high-profile resignation. This one probably even more in disgrace. You know, nothing has been proven again about Ambassador Mandelson's behavior or anything nefarious, but, calling Jeffrey Epstein your best pal is not going to go over well in this day and age. So it is interesting, Keir Starmer's own personal domestic politics, but you're absolutely right. Trump might be on his way in a few days. He met with Mandelson just earlier this week, where they did not discuss Epstein publicly at all. But, it is, how are you going to fire an ambassador, have a, ambassador serving on your soil, be asked to leave their post, and you, as the leader of the free world, that same sort of mistake or stain is not enough to take you out.
Quite extraordinary. This is a story we will be watching with huge interest. Finally, quick look at New York Fashion Week. So that begins today. And there's a story here about how Trump's tariffs are affecting it.
Yes, so as you mentioned, New York Fashion Week kicks off today. I will leave the beautiful analysis of what we will see come down the runway to our fashion director, Natalie Theodosi. But what I did think was interesting is that it is the first major fashion week after the global tariffs went into effect. Effectively, designers preparing for a New York Fashion Week show had about 5 weeks when this information was released, and they went into effect of how they were going to pivot their designs. Textiles, for example, textiles coming out of South Korea, like organza, I read, are now are 15% more expensive. We have 35% tariffs with China. So all of these raw materials are becoming so much more expensive, and it's going to be very interesting and important for the broader fashion industry to see how these designers have gone about creating a sort of new retail environment for themselves.
Anita, thank you very much indeed. That's Anita Riotta there. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. A Brazilian Supreme Court justice has voted to acquit former President Jair Bolsonaro of an alleged coup attempt and annul his trial over jurisdiction, breaking with peers and raising the odds of an appeal of a verdict this week. However, the High Court still seems likely to convict Bolsonaro of plotting a coup to remain in power after he was voted out of office in 2022. US President Donald Trump halted the deportation of hundreds of South Korean Hyundai battery plant workers arrested during an immigration enforcement raid and proposed they stay to train Americans, the Financial Times has reported. South Korea's president has warned that the immigration raid could chill Korean investment in America. And Nepal's health ministry says 25 people have now been killed and more than 600 injured in anti-corruption protests that forced Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli to resign. Soldiers are guarding Parliament and patrolling Kathmandu, which is under a curfew, as talks with demonstrators are being prepared. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now for a look behind the headlines, here's Monocle's Laura Kramer on a new bright spot in Neapolitan architecture.
The silver lining found in waiting for tardy Italian transport is that, at least in Naples, the stations are worth spending time in. Artist Anish Kapoor's new Neapolitan station, the Monte Sant'Angelo subway, is finally opening to the public today, almost 2 decades after it was commissioned in 2003. The station's new grand and elemental exterior is a long and curving form with a terracotta hue of earthenware and represents the latest piece in a network of artist-designed stations across the Campania capital. Naples transformed much of its metro system a decade ago with new stations designed by artists and architects such as Oscar Tusquets Blanca and Alvaro Siza. Despite its late arrival, Kapoor's shapely station will be welcomed by commuters who tend to enjoy a little theater and design while on the move. As much of Europe struggles to keep trains running on time, other cities should take note. Where you wait can matter almost as much as how long you have to wait.
That was Monocle's Laura Kramer. For more, you can sign up to our daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute. Head over to monocle.com/minute. This is The Globalist. It is 8:32 in Paris, 7:32 in London. France's new Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, was sworn in yesterday as Block Everything protests continued across the country. For President Macron, this is another gamble after a rapid turnover of Prime Ministers. Lecornu is his 5th in just 21 months. The challenge now is whether he can steady a divided Parliament, calm the streets and restore confidence at a moment when the French economy itself looks fragile. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Florence Biedermann, who is a journalist and political analyst and the former chief editor at AFP. Florence, good to have you back on the show. What's the latest on the demonstrations? How widespread were they? Are they ongoing?
Well, they don't seem to be ongoing. And let's say on a French scale, they were not that impressive. As you know, French have a tradition to protest and demonstrate. The point is that there was officially some 200,000 demonstrators. There were demonstrations and attempt to block the country in several big cities, but the police forces intervened pretty quickly. Like they were perfectly aware of what was going on. And so the country was not blocked, and it has not been like the pandemonium or the big blockade you could fear. The problem is that there may be other actions coming. The problem for the government is, of course, the day the prime minister is sworn in, it's not a good omen to start under this situation. And the trade unions have also called for a day of protest on the 18th of September, which means very soon. And this will probably be much bigger, and you can feel, in any case, there is this social unrest and a deep social dissatisfaction in the country over the political situation and over the situation as a whole.
What does Le Cornu bring to the job that his predecessors did not?
That's a very good question. What he brings, what he's supposed to bring, and by the way, you have to mention that it was Macron's choice for the last time when he appointed François Bayrou. Bayrou was not his first choice. He wanted already to appoint Sébastien Lecornu. That means Macron really bets on him. He's a close advisor of him. He has been ministers in all his governments for 7 years in a row, which is kind of an incredible challenge. And he expects, I guess, he's presented as somebody who can talk with many people, who can even talk to the far right. By the way, he was criticized for this because he had a meeting with Marine Le Pen that was kind of secret at the time. He is supposed to be a moderate. He's supposed to be a man of dialogue. But, somehow you heard this already. That was already said, like, for François Bayrou, his predecessor, for Michel Barnier, his predecessor. So there is a lot of skepticism on what he can achieve, because whatever his skills are, I mean, the situation will be the same in the National Assembly with 3 antagonist groups that obviously cannot really make alliance. At least they've been trying for months and he didn't succeed. So what will he bring? Well, he has, let's say, a daunting task, and there is a lot of skepticism on the fact that he succeeds.
I mean, what can he possibly do to reassure nervous investors and steady the economy? I mean, this is what it comes down to.
Absolutely. He will have, maybe he will be, obviously his predecessors failed because there was a lack of dialogue. With his own centrist group and with the opposition. So what he can do is at least manage to have the budget, the 2026 budget adopted, because this was one of the reasons the Bayrou government fell, because people were protesting against this austerity budget. France has this amazing public debt that it has to rein in. So this was an austerity budget that was refused. So the first thing Le Cornu should do is talk to everyone. Already he convoked this morning, like, all the heads of his centrist bloc, let's say, or alliance, to talk with them. And surprisingly, this is not what his predecessor did. So will all this dialogue, all this negotiation at least manage to, stabilize the budget and to stabilize the situation? This remains to be seen, but this is definitely the hope for the French people too.
And Florence, finally, what does this tell us about France's trajectory as it edges towards the 2027 presidential race? Will Macron last that long?
That's his hope. And in any case, it's more than a hope, because he said he would never resign. And I think you can be living on this. And this succession of governments, supposing Le Cornu lasts only a few months, then you can be sure he will appoint another prime minister. His goal, in any case, is to hang on till this next presidential election. So the trajectory is not good. When you think about it, you can see this as a political crisis. You see no solution to it. And the worry is that, even the presidential election, whether it will bring, any kind of, people meeting together and deciding to work together under a new president. This is also something that is not not sure at all. So definitely it's rather like more interrogation on the capacity of France to stabilize itself. And that's very worrying, yeah. Politically, it's really worrying.
Florence, lovely to talk to you again. That's Florence Biederman speaking to us from Paris. This is Monocle Radio. It's 15:38 in Tokyo, 7:38 here in London. And we cross now to our Tokyo studio where Hans Grimmel, who's Asia editor at Automotive News, gives us a round of the car industry. Hans, good morning to you, or good afternoon to you where you are. We've been following in the headlines this whole Hyundai story, and South Korea has dispatched an emergency response team to the US to repatriate those 300 nationals who were caught up in the immigration authorities' raid. But now there are differing reports coming out that Trump may have said that they should stay, they should train American workers. Obviously, it's knocking investors who from Korea who are thinking about investing in America. What is the latest on this story?
Well, I think your description of mixed signals is correct. There seem to be some come and go about what's happening there. The South Korean government has dispatched a jumbo jet to go pick them up and bring them back home. They were hoping to leave as early as Wednesday. That was apparently delayed on the orders of President Donald Trump, and partly to talk about having them stay if they'd like to train workers or finish the job to keep the construction going. South Korean officials apparently argued that, maybe that's an option, but let's get them home first because they've been traumatized and are exhausted. And I think that the goal now is to maybe have those willing to go home or wanting to go home voluntarily repatriate themselves on Thursday. So that's where we stand with things. You're right. This seems to lay bare a kind of a contradiction in some of the policies of Donald Trump and his administration. On one hand, trying to stoke international investment in the U.S. economy and its businesses, and on the other hand, making it difficult to do so.
Is this going to affect Hyundai's overseas production?
Now, it doesn't seem to be affecting their overseas production because the plant there, the vehicle plant, is still operating normally, and this is a battery plant that was scheduled to come online later. So it was still under construction and not really supplying batteries yet for vehicles that are being used. But it's unclear yet exactly how long this interruption in the construction will last, or how impactful it will be in the mid to long term. Also under review are other battery plants being set up by the same Korean battery company, which is LG Energy Solution. And they're setting up plants not only in Georgia, where this plant was affected, but elsewhere in the United States, including a joint venture with Honda, Japan's Honda Motor in Ohio. And there are differing reports, too, about the status of a suspension of construction at those plants as the companies involved to kind of review their visa status of their workers.
Now, Toyota has been restructuring U.S. production too. Can you tell us more about that?
Right. That's a plan to maybe move some of their Lexus production out of their Kentucky plant and consolidate it at a Lexus plant, or a plant that makes Lexus products in Indiana. They say that is not related at all to the tariff situation. What they seem to be doing is to make some room in the Kentucky plant to introduce some new electric vehicles so that they can increase EV production in Kentucky. It's curious, however, because the expected demand for electric vehicles in the United States is supposed to moderate going forward as things like the tariffs and things like the suspension or the curtailment of EV incentives in the United States take a bite out of demand. So it's unclear exactly how much space they need in the Kentucky plant to feed EV demand.
And finally, a very brief look at tariffs. As you were mentioning, the US says it will reduce auto tariffs on Japan to 15% later this month. How have car makers in Japan been affected by tariffs so far? And if it's reduced, how far will the situation change?
Right. Well, they started off before this tariff turmoil. Started off with a 2.5% tariff in the United States, and that which was negligible, I guess you could say. Trump added on 25% to that originally, building it to about 27.5%, which was a huge hurdle for them. Through negotiations, they knocked it down to 15% total. In late July, and then it's taken them basically 2 months to actually sign the executive order that would put those tariffs into action. So there were 2 additional months added on of the 25% tariffs, even after they had brokered the deal. So that added on to the costs beyond what they were expecting. But at the end of July, they were already expecting all the 6 major companies that were doing business in the United States, that are doing business in the United States, they expected a hit of almost $20 billion with the B dollars of extra cost due to those tariffs this fiscal year. So they were expecting a huge hit from that. And right now, their primary mission is how to whittle that down.
Hans, thank you very much indeed. I believe there's a big storm coming in Tokyo, so keep safe there. It was Hans Grimmel live from our Tokyo studio, and this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
This week, London played host to the global design and creative community as the World Design Congress took place at the brutalist masterpiece, the Barbican Centre. Over 2 days, over 1,200 people from 77 countries joined together to talk about how design can help improve quality of life and make better cities. One of them was Durit Bunag, an architect and design advisor to Thailand's Ministry of Culture. His participation in the summit had one clear focus: to reframe Thailand as Asia's design capital and bring a global event to Bangkok next year. Monocle's executive producer and senior foreign correspondent Carlotta Rebello caught up with Duangrit earlier and started by asking him to describe the Thai design scene.
I think one of the things is that we have a very creative people in Bangkok. They are very funny in a way, and they are very professional in a way. The thing is that during the past few decades, I think they have been a compromise in terms of communication to the world of what their capacity really is. I think there is a time that, the previous government, they have a very strong policy, try to promote Thai designer throughout the world. And I think we are part of the committee that's working on that. Now, I think politically speaking, the government changed a little bit. We changed the prime minister. So I think we are not quite sure whether the policy will remain. But we as an entity, as a people, we want this to actually continue. So we're forming a new association called Thailand Designer and Architect Association, or TADA. And I think we can work that group of people from the professional with the government agency to create a certain thing similar to this WBO is doing right now for this event.
Now, the ambition here, you're here with government agencies helping promote not just Thai design, but this ambition to bring quite a big global event back home as well and bring these practitioners back home. What is the dream there?
We have a strong ambition called trying to do this, we call the Bangkok International Design Expo by November 2026. It's not only a plan, it's more like a project already, okay? And we call this the world ends. And I think in the sense that we're trying to see the change, and we want to use Bangkok as a point of a hinge to mark the change in the design world globally. So it's not about promoting Thai design or Thai designer, but we want to use Thai design and Thai designer as a platform to foresee the changing in the design world. So we ask the question, which is a very provocative question, and the story and the word is the world ends. And it's actually the world ends in the way that the new world will begin. So we question the integrity of the theoretical thinking in terms of design, where we are going, where we came from, okay? And what could be next paradigm for the design world. So that's why we brought up that question, not for the favor of the country, but the favor of the whole global design community, which people think that we are crazy, but and why Bangkok, we are not even, in Europe and, in this central part of the global design community. But I think that is the right way of doing it, because we want to shift that to the other side of the world conversation.
Well, that's precisely my next question, because often, professionals in all creative industries, not just designers, but I'll even speak for myself as a journalist, going to conferences around the world. It is interesting how by shifting where those conferences are and being placed elsewhere, the way you see the same issues changes, the same solutions changes, and your connections too. So is the ambition here that, by bringing the design world, the global design world to Bangkok, you're able to also help, change the way some people might see their work or might engage with one another?
Exactly. I think for us, possibility of design world is very contextual. So if the context of the conversation change, maybe you can see new conversation, okay? So I think that is something we try to put radically for people in the design world to see. London is great. We're right now in London, and it is great. But we want to actually create the context of the conversation that can, creating a new agenda, right? So I think bringing to Bangkok is very right position about it. I'm sure you're quite familiar with the city, and it's very much chaotic. It's very much unpredictable in a way, but it's also very casual and fun, okay? So I think in that kind of domain, it can actually make shift for things that might be a possible future also for the design world.
And I guess just finally, when we think about design in Thailand, there's a very particular aesthetic that comes to mind. There's a deep respect for traditional techniques and craft and artisans, and that connection to local makers, even when doing global projects. Are those just some of the lessons that, Thai designers can teach the rest of the world? When you are coming to places like the World Design Congress here in London, I know that in this case, you are on a big drive to push people to come to you, but what are some of the things you feel like in this relationship and this exchange of knowledge that you can maybe teach some of us too?
So I think we have this strong and deep essence in terms of our culture that can be a contribution to the world. And we would like to use this opportunity to promote more for you to understand. And I think it's more like a takeaway, okay? It's not something that we will use it to create a trap for you to visit the Bangkok. But I think it's something that we want you to take away from the event or from the project that we're doing, so you can make use of that. Like you just said, craft and culture is something that can be a creative inspiration at the source. So we want to make that for your use. And I think if the global community can actually connect it through that possibility, it could be more exciting. We can be more exciting, you can be more exciting, and it's something that we want to see.
Jingert Brunang there in conversation with Monocle's Carlotta Rebello at the World Design Congress in London. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. And finally, here in Britain, the National Gallery is lifting its 1900 cut-off for its art collection. Backed by donations totalling £375 million, it's announced a new wing and launched an international architectural competition. Well, for more, I'm joined by Francesca Gavin, Editor-in-Chief of Epoch Review and founder of Art Present Future. Francesca, thanks for coming on the show. Why was the 1900 cut-off in place for so long, and why change it now?
I think that's really interesting. I mean, it's quite a coup, and the whole of the art world is definitely holding their breath because it's a real redefinition of the boundaries between old master, modern, and contemporary art. But I think it's just to do with timing. Essentially, this is the 200th anniversary this year of the National Gallery. It was very much established as a certain canon of what art was, and obviously 200 years ago 1900 was immensely contemporary, so I think it's just catching up with the times.
I mean, was that ban, that cut-off period, always strictly adhered to?
There's a few blurry motions around it. Occasionally we've seen things coming from the turn of the century. Obviously there's a great room or two that's devoted to Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, with some of the greater paintings actually within the gallery, but in general, there's obviously been some contemporary interventions, but we haven't seen anything like what we're about to see.
I mean, I wonder how this might risk overlap with the remit of the Tate.
There's a lot of collaboration happening between the director of the National Gallery, Gabriele Finaldi, and Maria Balshaw at the Tate. Obviously, the Tate itself has been under quite a lot of financial pressures and been letting go a lot of staff. And I think they're really struggling to keep up with their remit in terms of space and exhibitions and funding. And the National Gallery this is an unsurpassed donation from more than, the fundraising is quite exceptional. They're going to be creating a very large new exhibition space. The whole entire building to house these paintings is almost the size of the Sainsbury wing, which holds all the early masters. So I think the collaboration with the Tate is actually going to be quite well done. I think there's going to be a consciousness of, because they're not buying an entire new body of work. Some of it will be donations and some of it will be loans. So I'm sure there will be loans from the Tate collection from the 20th century that will be inserted within the National Gallery's collection.
I mean, what counts as modern art?
Oh, that's a really interesting word. Well, I mean, modern art is very much seen as 20th century. If you go to an auction, if you're looking at modern art, we're looking at mid-century art, essentially, the big boys, Abex, etc. And contemporary is really seen 1970 onwards, kind of. But obviously now we're in the 21st century and that's all being redefined. I think those timescales shift quite naturally as we move through different kinds of mediums, through different kinds of aesthetics. But the focus, what's so interesting in the National Gallery, it's very much going to be about painting. They've made it quite clear that they're not going to be doing other mediums. They really want the National Gallery to be the home of painting within London.
You've talked about this huge new wing that will be built, and of course the astonishing size of these donations, very unusual coming from the private sector in that way. Tell us more about the architectural design competition for this new wing.
Well, the building's going to happen in the 2030s, and they're only opening the design. It'll be an open call, and there'll be people able to apply, obviously, with different proposals. So it's going to take quite a while before we actually see what the result of this would be. But if anyone knows the section behind the National Gallery, there's a Thistle Hotel. It's that location, which was actually bought, I think, around a decade ago. So I think it's going to be quite exciting. Obviously, the Sainsbury wing is very much defining a kind of 90s form of architecture, and it's a very different look to the neoclassicism of the National Gallery. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what they choose.
And finally, Francesca, what does the scale of this expansion say about Britain's cultural ambition?
We really saw investment into the idea of London as a heart of culture around the millennium when the Tate Modern itself was built. And there was this huge burst when suddenly the concept of art being a mainstream thing, which actually also was investment, but also that attracted huge bodies of international visitors. And the National Gallery has an incredible location. It literally is at the heart of the city. So I think this investment on something public facing is really important. I think it's also important to note who the donors are, one of them being the Michael Moritz Crankstart Foundation. And that's a Time journalist who turned venture capitalist who's actually very involved in campaigning against MAGA and Trump. So I think there's also a political edge to this in terms of the opportunity and educational aspect of culture.
And where do we as Britons sit in terms of cultural ambition when you look at Europe as a whole?
Well, I mean, the best thing about the National Gallery is it's free. I think that's one of the most amazing things that happened in the 20th century. We can visit this. And I think in terms of how we define ourselves, I think that's really fascinating. Obviously, the Tate's remit is all British art, and the National Gallery has always had a very European focus. So it's going to be really interesting seeing how they're expanding the position of London as a heart of international culture with the growth of post-1900 European, but also geographically expanded artworks. I think that's really ambitious, but something for us to be proud of. There's a culture that is something to define our country by.
Francesca, thank you very much indeed. That's Francesca Gavin there. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Anita Riotta and Carlotta Robello, our researcher, Daniela Braw-Smith, and our studio manager, Elliot Greenfield. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and the briefing will be live at midday in London. The Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.